Imagine a visionary billionaire just knocks on your front door.
Okay, I'm listening.
You've never met this person, right? But they have this incredible pitch. They're building the very first permanent human colony on Mars. And, well, they want to recruit your 10-year-old child to go.
Just the 10-year-old. That's intense.
Yeah. The billionaire explains that kids are uniquely suited for this mission because they purportedly adapt better to the low gravity. I mean, if they go through puberty on Mars, their bodies will permanently tailor themselves to the alien environment.
Which sounds completely terrifying as a parent.
Right. But your 10-year-old is standing there literally begging to go. All their friends are going. They already checked the box on some online form, so they are officially signed up.
The peer pressure's already locked in.
Exactly. But then you, as the parent, you start doing some basic research on the conditions of this Martian colony. You look at the radiation levels. Earth has a magnetosphere, a powerful protective shield blocking solar wind and cosmic rays.
And Mars definitely does not have that.
No, it doesn't. So a massive, unmitigated amount of radiation would shoot directly through the DNA of every single cell in your child's developing body.
That's catastrophic cellular damage.
When you ask the colony planners about this, you find out they base their protective shields entirely on adult astronauts who already face elevated cancer risks. But children, their cells are dividing and developing rapidly.
So they didn't run any safety tests for kids?
The answer is no. Did they research child safety for this radiation? No. You'd call the police, right? You would never let them go.
Obviously. You'd lock the door.
But what if I told you that society has already handed an entire generation a ticket to a world just as dangerous, without any shields whatsoever? That is the explosive premise of the book we are tearing into today, The Anxious Generation. How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt.
It is a critical journey to take, especially when we're analyzing a shift in human development of this sheer magnitude.
Welcome to Fact Horizon. This is where history meets mystery and facts define the future. We explore the profound truths of human existence, the wonders of the mind, and the secrets of the cosmos all in one place. If you seek knowledge and wonder, you're in the right spot. Subscribe now and join our journey beyond the horizon.
And I really want to ask you, the listener, to do something before we dive in today. Think about the device sitting in your pocket right now.
Or maybe the one they're using to listen to this deep dive.
Exactly. I want you to objectively evaluate it. We accept these supercomputers as normal, just the background noise of modern life. But consider how these devices have fundamentally rewired human development.
We basically handed a portal to an alternate universe, to an entire generation of developing minds.
Right, without understanding the physics of that universe at all.
The core premise we are unpacking today is staggering when you step back and look at the scale. The book details how human childhood underwent this massive, rapid shift from being play-based to phone-based, resulting in a catastrophic decline in mental health for Generation Z. Today, we are diving into part one of this profound work.
There is so much vital ground to cover to understand how this happened.
There really is. So I want to clearly announce the exact chapters we are covering today in English. We're starting with Introduction, Growing Up on Mars, and then Chapter 1, The Surge of Suffering.
The date in that first chapter is just undeniable.
It really sets the stage. Then we're moving into Chapter 2, What Children Need to Do in Childhood. Chapter 3, Discover Mode and the Need for Risky Play. And Chapter 4, Puberty and the Block Transition to Adulthood.
That block transition is where the biology really comes into focus.
Yeah, it's fascinating. After that, we hit Chapter 5, The 4 Foundational Harms: Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
And we have to look at how this impacts the sexes differently.
Exactly, which brings us to Chapter 6, Why Social Media Harms Girls More Than Boys, and finally Chapter 7, What is Happening to Boys.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that opening Mars analogy maps onto our current regulatory reality.
Yeah.
Because when we think about sending a child to Mars, we also have to consider the gravity.
Right, it's not just the radiation.
No, Earth's gravity has optimized our bodily structure over millions of years of mammalian evolution. Our bones, our hearts, they all develop against this constant pull of 1G. But Mars only has 38% of Earth's gravity.
So what does that actually do to a developing body?
Well, for a child developing in that environment, you're looking at severe permanent deformities in their skeletons and their hearts. Fluids would literally pool in the brain cavity, pressing on the eyeballs, physically changing their shape.
That's horrifying.
It is. And if you ask the tech executives who built this virtual Mars, if they took the psychological vulnerability of developing children into account before recruiting them to their platforms, the answer is a resounding no.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the lack of guardrails is what completely blows my mind. You would naturally assume there is some robust, modern legal framework protecting minors online.
You would think so, yeah.
But when you look at the laws in the United States, the main standard is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. And that was enacted all the way back in 1998.
1998? I mean, think about the technological landscape back then. We are talking about dial-up internet.
AOL chat rooms.
Exactly. Static web pages. It was a completely different era of human communication long before the smartphone and long before algorithmic feeds or modern social media even existed.
And the kicker here is how COPPA established the legal age of internet adulthood at 13. I always just assumed that number was based on, like, some kind of developmental psychology standard.
A lot of people assume that.
But the book points out it wasn't based on neuroscience or mental health or protecting kids from addictive algorithms at all. It was set at 13 purely for data privacy reasons.
Right. It was just a compromise with tech lobbyists.
It literally just meant companies couldn't harvest and sell the data of kids under 13 without verifiable parental consent.
Which raises a really important question about enforcement. How do these multi-billion-dollar tech giants verify this age today?
Oh, they don't.
Right. If a bank needs to verify your identity, they require robust documentation. But to enter this virtual Mars, the sum total of the security apparatus is just a digital checkbox.
A kid just clicks a button saying they're 13.
Or they just enter a fake birth year. There is no requirement for real identification, no mandate for a parent's digital signature.
And the result of that open door is staggering. The data shows that 40% of children under 13 have Instagram accounts. I mean, 40%. That is an enormous failure of regulation.
The tech companies basically built the rockets to Mars, intentionally left the doors wide open, and just looked the other way while millions of preteens climbed aboard.
It's crazy to think about. I draw a direct comparison to, like, the tobacco industry or vaping or the oil companies that used leaded gasoline.
Oh, the leaded gasoline comparison is spot on.
For decades, oil companies fought tooth and nail against banning leaded gasoline, even as undeniable evidence mounted that it was directly interfering with the brain development of millions of children.
It was spiking antisocial behavior globally.
Yeah, but eventually society woke up. We regulated it. We put strict age limits on tobacco and alcohol. We banned marketing those products to minors, specifically because we understand that developing bodies are highly vulnerable to toxins.
But the tech industry managed to evade this kind of scrutiny. They did this by framing their products as mere communication tools, rather than highly engineered behavioral modification systems.
Which is really what they are.
Exactly. They maximize what they call engagement, which is essentially the corporate euphemism for psychological addiction. They utilize sophisticated techniques, variable reward schedules, endless scrolling on developing brains.
Right during puberty, too.
Precisely. They hooked a generation during the most vulnerable stage of neurological development, a time when the brain is rapidly rewiring its neural pathways.
So, if we have effectively sent an entire generation to this virtual Mars, without radiation shields, without the gravity of the real world, what actually happened to their minds once they got there?
That brings us straight to the hard data, the surge of suffering.
And the numbers we are looking at are undeniably stark. We are looking at a synchronized international spike in adolescent mental illness that occurred precisely between 2010 and 2015.
Right. The specific window the author defines as the Great Rewiring.
The visual representation of this data is just striking. When researchers graph this out over time, looking at depression and anxiety, you see a long period of relative stability through the late 1990s and the 2000s.
The trend lines are essentially flat.
Just standard baseline levels of teenage angst. But then right around 2012, the lines don't just drift upward, they violently shoot upward.
They form a classic hockey stick graph.
Exactly. It's a sudden, sharp, massive inflection point that correlates perfectly with the widespread adoption of smartphones and high-speed mobile broadband.
To really grasp what that hockey stick represents for you listening, we need to understand exactly what kind of suffering surged. We aren't just talking about kids acting out.
No, the book makes a vital distinction here between two types of psychiatric disorders: internalizing disorders and externalizing disorders.
Right. Externalizing disorders are conditions where a person feels deep distress, but they turn those symptoms outward onto other people or their environment.
So like conduct issues or physical violence.
Exactly. Difficulty managing anger, physical bullying, excessive risk-taking, and historically, boys and men have suffered higher rates of these externalizing disorders.
But the massive surge we see starting in the 2010s wasn't an explosion of youth violence.
No, it was heavily concentrated in the other category, internalizing disorders. These are conditions where a person feels profound distress, but they process those symptoms inwardly.
They turn it all in on themselves.
Yes. They are overwhelmed by anxiety, fear, sadness. Instead of lashing out, they ruminate. They spiral into negative thoughts and often withdraw completely from physical social engagement.
And the data shows both sexes have seen a massive rise in these internalizing disorders since the early 2010s.
While externalizing disorders actually decreased during that same time.
The defining illnesses of Generation Z really are anxiety and depression. Let's drill down deeply into anxiety for a second, because the text provides a fascinating psychiatric distinction that I think most people completely conflate: the difference between fear and anxiety.
It's a fundamental difference in how the human brain processes a threat. According to the Diagnostic Manual of Psychiatry, the DSM-5-TR, fear is the response to a real, perceived, and crucially imminent threat.
Imminent, right here, right now.
Exactly. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the anticipation of a future threat.
But how does that actually play out in the neurology of the brain?
Well, fear is our most ancient evolutionary alarm bell. In a prehistoric world full of predators, you needed a lightning-fast response system. In fact, this system is so heavily optimized that it can trigger a physical fear response before visual information even fully reaches the back of the brain to be consciously processed.
Wait, I really want to make sure I'm grasping this. The brain triggers the physical alarm before you even consciously understand what you were looking at.
Precisely. The visual data hits the thalamus, which acts as a relay station. It sends one signal the long way around to the visual cortex so you can identify the object. But it sends a second, faster signal directly to the amygdala, the threat detection center.
Oh, wow.
That is why, if you are hiking, you can physically jump backward from a coiled shape on the trail before you consciously register, whether it's a venomous snake or just a twisted branch.
Because the fast signal triggered the adrenaline.
Exactly. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system. But once your visual cortex catches up, identifies it as a stick, the alarm shuts off. The stress hormones flush out, and the fear subsides.
But anxiety operates on a completely different timeline.
Anxiety triggers parts of that exact same ancient alarm system, utilizing the same stress hormones, but it triggers them when a threat is merely perceived as possible in the future.
Which means the alarm doesn't shut off.
Right. Some baseline anxiety is healthy. It motivates you to study for a test. But when that alarm bell is on a hair trigger, constantly activated by digital notifications that pose no physical threat, it keeps the individual in a perpetual state of physiological distress.
The cortisol never fully flushes out.
That chronic state of heightened arousal is what defines an anxiety disorder.
And because humans are intensely social creatures, our evolutionary alarm bells aren't just tuned to physical predators, right? They are tuned to our tribe.
That is the core vulnerability here. Our primary evolutionary advantage was our capacity to form highly cooperative social groups. So our brains are exquisitely attuned to social threats.
Because back in the day, being kicked out of the tribe meant certain death.
Exactly. For a modern adolescent whose brain is wired to secure their place in a peer group, the threat of social death triggers the exact same terror in the amygdala as the threat of physical death.
Which makes handing a 12-year-old a device that quantifies their social worth and exposes them to the judgment of thousands of peers 247 seem like a spectacularly bad idea.
It's an evolutionary mismatch.
Let's look at the actual numbers on this surge, because it is staggering. By the year 2020, the data shows that 1 in 4 American teen girls had experienced a major depressive episode in the previous year. 1 in 4.
And it is vital to understand that a major depressive episode is not merely feeling sad for a day. The psychiatric definition requires a severely depressed mood consistently present for at least 2 weeks.
It involves crushing physical symptoms.
Yes. Severe fatigue, drastic changes in appetite, insomnia, and very often suicidal ideation because the suffering feels inescapable to the teenager.
Now, whenever these dramatic statistics are brought up, there is always this wave of skepticism. People immediately ask, is this real? Or is Gen Z just more comfortable talking about mental health on surveys?
If the only data researchers had was self-reported surveys, you might be able to argue it's just a cultural shift in vocabulary. The researchers didn't stop there. They looked at hard behavioral hospital records.
And those records are horrifying. They looked specifically at emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm. In psychiatric terms, NSSI, or non-suicidal self-injury, like severe cutting.
And actual suicide attempts resulting in hospitalization.
Right. And the data for preteen and young teen girls ages 10 to 14 is chilling. Between 2010 and 2020, hospital emergency room visits for self-harm in this group increased by a staggering 188%.
They almost tripled in a single decade. And the tragic reality is that suicide rates for this exact same age group spiked concurrently.
You cannot self-report your way into an emergency room trauma ward.
Exactly. You cannot destigmatize your way into intensive care. This is undeniable behavioral evidence of a massive physical and psychological crisis.
To put the sheer scale of this into perspective, we are looking at a 150% relative increase in clinical depression since 2010 across the board. I really want that to sink in for you listening. This isn't a subtle demographic shift.
It is a tidal wave.
Depression became roughly 2.5 times more prevalent in just a few years, and it hit everywhere, across all demographics, all races, and multiple developed nations simultaneously.
It is an epidemic by any strict epidemiological definition. But to understand why this generation was so uniquely vulnerable to smartphones, we have to look backward.
We have to look at what childhood used to be. The book argues that the Great Rewiring didn't actually start with the iPhone in 2007. The foundation was laid decades earlier, in the 1980s and 90s, with a historic shift in parenting.
The decline of the play-based childhood. This is the crucial precursor. For all of human history, the young would learn how to navigate the world through free, unsupervised play.
And when we say free play, we mean truly free. No adults organizing the rules, no coaches keeping score, just kids outside negotiating boundaries entirely on their own.
Free play is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity for brain development. Think about young mammals like lion cubs. They spend massive energy play fighting.
They tumble, they bite each other a little too hard.
Right, and the one who gets bitten yelps, the aggressor backs off, and they learn the boundaries of social interaction. In humans, the small-scale physical challenges of unsupervised play act as a form of psychological inoculation.
Like a vaccine for anxiety.
Exactly. It exposes the nervous system to small, manageable doses of fear. It prepares them to face much larger challenges later and rely less on their parents for emotional regulation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text uses this brilliant framework to explain the neurological state of a playing child. Discover mode versus defend mode. How do these dictate brain development?
When children are in an environment where they feel secure but are allowed to take small physical risks, like climbing a tree higher than before, their brains enter discover mode.
So they're open to new experiences.
Governed by the brain's reward and learning centers, yes. They're overcoming innate childhood fears through direct exposure. They learn they can fall, feel panic, survive, and get back up.
But if they are constantly supervised by an adult hovering over them, warning them of danger at every turn, they shift into defend mode.
Which is the exact opposite neurological state, a state of hypervigilance governed by the amygdala. If a child never engages in risky play, they never receive that psychological inoculation.
Because the adult is always managing the fear for them.
Right. So when they hit the massive, complex social challenges of puberty, they lack the emotional resilience to handle it. The book calls this a blocked transition to adulthood.
Okay, let's unpack this immense irony because it is central to the entire tragedy. In the 80s and 90s, we saw the rise of incredibly fearful, overprotective parenting. The media was pushing the stranger danger panic 2004-7.
Missing kids' faces on milk cartons.
Exactly. Parents became utterly terrified that if they let their kids walk to the park alone, they would be abducted. So adults systematically restricted unsupervised outdoor play to protect them from real-world dangers.
Dangers that, statistically speaking, were incredibly rare.
But fast forward to the 2010s, those exact same parents who wouldn't let a 12-year-old walk 3 blocks to the store out of fear of a kidnapper handed that same 12-year-old a smartphone with unrestricted internet access.
They locked them safely inside the physical walls of the house, but granted them full independence in a highly dangerous, unregulated virtual world.
Filled with actual strangers and toxic algorithms.
It is a devastating paradox. We overprotected them in the real world, where they needed manageable risks, and we underprotected them in the virtual world, where the risks were existential.
To understand why substituting the real world with the virtual world is so destructive, the text gives us 4 strict criteria that contrast the two. This really clarified things for me. Criteria number 1, embodiment.
In the real world, all interactions are embodied. We use our physical bodies to communicate. Our brains evolved to read micro-expressions, posture, and tone of voice.
But in the virtual world,
It's entirely disembodied. No physical body is needed, just text and curated images. The cues our brains rely on for empathy are completely stripped away. You could literally be talking to an AI bot and not know the difference.
that's wild. Okay, criteria number 2, timing.
The real world is synchronous. Interactions happen in real time. There are subtle social cues about pausing and taking turns to speak. The virtual world is heavily asynchronous.
So a teen can craft a response over an hour, overthink it, edit it 10 times.
Or just ghost the person entirely without facing their immediate reaction. It removes the necessity for spontaneous social grace.
Criteria number 3, audience size.
The real world involves one-to-one or one-to-several communication. You're talking to a single person or a small group. Only one interaction is happening at a given moment.
Requiring focused attention.
Right. But the virtual world involves one-to-many broadcasting. A single post goes to a vast audience, and multiple interactions happen in parallel, fracturing the child's attention.
And the final criteria, number 4, which might be the absolute most crucial element for developing emotional maturity, the bar for entry and exit.
In the real world, communities have a naturally high bar for entry and exit. You are physically stuck with your classmates or neighbors, so you're motivated to invest in those relationships.
You have to learn to compromise and repair rifts when conflicts happen.
Yes, that friction is where maturity is born. But the virtual world has an incredibly low bar for entry and exit. You can block someone with a single tap on a screen.
Relationships become disposable?
Exactly. If someone challenges you, you block them. A child never builds the social muscles required to navigate adult relationships.
By replacing real-world boundaries with the limitlessness of the virtual world, we subjected an entire generation to what the book calls the 4 foundational harms. Let's lay them out. Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, smartphones act as ultimate experience blockers. The device absorbs all available free time. So while kids sit safely in their bedrooms, they are aggressively deprived of the embodied social experiences they need most.
They miss the rites of passage. They miss messy, awkward romantic attachments. They miss cultural apprenticeships, learning how to exist in adult society by mimicking adults in real physical spaces.
Instead of apprenticing in the real world, they're just scrolling in isolation.
And losing massive amounts of sleep while they do it.
Sleep deprivation skyrocketed in exact tandem with smartphone adoption. The specific wavelength of blue light emitted by screens suppresses the pineal gland's production of melatonin.
Which regulates the sleep-wake cycle.
Combine that biological suppression with endless notifications and the anxiety of missing out, and teenagers routinely stay awake into the early morning. This devastates brain development, impairs emotional regulation, and crushes academic performance.
Because they need that deep REM sleep to consolidate learning.
Precisely.
And even when they are awake, their attention is completely fragmented.
Yes. When a teenager is constantly task switching between TikTok, texts, and homework, they're in a state of continuous partial attention. The human brain incurs a cognitive cost every time it switches tasks.
They lose the ability to sustain deep focus.
They can't read long-form text or even sit alone with their thoughts without an overwhelming urge to stimulate their brains with a screen.
Here's where it gets really interesting regarding the 4th harm, addiction. I want to use an analogy here. Think about the adolescent brain like a car being built on an assembly line.
Okay, a car analogy.
The engine, the amygdala, and the reward-seeking centers that crave dopamine and thrill, that's fully installed and revving loudly during puberty. But the brakes, the frontal cortex, responsible for self-control and resisting temptation, that doesn't fully mature until our mid-20s.
That is a highly accurate biological framework. The accelerator's pressed to the floor, and the brake lines haven't even been fully connected yet.
So you have a 12-year-old whose reward center is screaming for validation, and we hand them a device designed by thousands of the smartest behavioral engineers, backed by billions of dollars, specifically optimized to bypass those weak brakes and flood the engine with dopamine.
It is not a fair fight. It's a neurological hijacking.
It really is.
The platforms utilize variable reward schedules, the exact same mechanism used in slot machines. They don't know if they'll get 0 likes or 100 likes. That unpredictability triggers massive dopamine spikes.
The book shares a harrowing anecdote that makes this terrifyingly clear. It's the story of a 14-year-old girl named Emily. Her parents saw the damaging effects Instagram was having on her. She was deeply agitated, disappearing into the screen. So they tried to intervene using monitoring software.
A completely logical parental response.
But the result wasn't a return to normal. Emily became incredibly deceptive. In one horrifying episode, she managed to get her mother's phone, disable the software, and threaten to kill herself if they ever reinstalled it.
When you hear that, you have to recognize it for what it is. That is the voice of severe clinical addiction, the violent reaction of an addict whose supply is being threatened.
Exactly. But here's the illuminating part. The mother took radical action. She sent Emily to a rugged, tech-free summer camp for 6 weeks. No phones whatsoever.
Just real-world embodied interactions.
And her mother reported that after camp, Emily was completely back to her normal, bright self. The depression had lifted. But the moment the smartphone was returned to her hands, the dark cloud immediately came back.
Wow. So it was entirely the device.
Yes. Finally, the mother took the smartphone away entirely for 2 months and gave Emily an old-school T9 flip phone. And again, Emily reverted completely to her normal, healthy self.
That outcome proves an essential point. The harm is primarily environmental. It is the device acting as a relentless neurotoxin. When you remove it, the brain's natural resilience allows it to heal.
But while these 4 harms affect all adolescents, the specific mechanisms of the damage look radically different depending on gender. This is a crucial pivot in the book's analysis.
The virtual world preys on girls and boys differently during puberty.
Let's look closely at the data on girls first. Why does social media harm girls so much more severely than boys?
To understand this, we have to look at the convergence of specific technological features rolled out between 2009 and 2012. It wasn't just the invention of the iPhone.
So what exactly changed during that window?
In 2009, platforms introduced the like button and shortly after the retweet or share button. Before this, social media was largely just a static way to keep up with friends.
But the like button hyper-viralized it.
Yes. It introduced instant, quantified feedback. It turned connection into a public performance with a visible scorecard. And then, in 2010, smartphone manufacturers added a massive physical hardware change, the front-facing camera.
Suddenly, the phone is a high-definition mirror broadcasting your face to the world.
Exactly. And in 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram, cementing a highly visual photo-first culture as the default mode of youth interaction.
And this convergence created a toxic environment uniquely devastating to girls. Why? Because adolescent girls are naturally highly attuned to complex social dynamics and relational aggression.
Right. We aren't talking about physical bullying in the hallway. We are talking about exclusion, spreading rumors, and brutal social comparison. Boys tend to use physical aggression, but girls use relational aggression.
And social media weaponized that natural vulnerability at a planetary scale. It transformed girls' social lives into a perpetual curation of an online brand.
They weren't just taking photos for memories. They were curating heavily filtered photos to be scrutinized by peers and strangers.
They became trapped in a matrix of constant visual comparison. And the threat of online shaming, triggering that amygdala fear of social death we talked about, was looming 24/7.
Before smartphones, if a girl was bullied at school, she could go home, shut the door, and be physically safe.
But with a smartphone, the bullying follows you right into your bed at night. The sanctuary was breached.
Which perfectly explains the massive spike in internalizing disorders and self-harm we discussed. The evolutionary alarm bell is constantly ringing, and there is nowhere to hide.
But the story for boys is remarkably different. If girls are being crushed by the relational aggression of social media, where are the boys going, and why are their lives falling apart?
They are sinking deep into the immersive, highly engineered virtual worlds of multiplayer video games and streams of internet pornography. Boys are generally less focused on visual comparisons.
But their reward systems are susceptible to something else.
Yes, the mastery, progression, and instant gratification loops engineered into modern video games. Instead of suffering from hyper-awareness of social status, boys suffer from a total withdrawal from the real world.
A slow fade out of reality. The book outlines how this leads to a massive spike in the failure to launch.
Boys are retreating from the friction of the physical world. They are avoiding real-world challenges and opting out of the awkwardness of embodied social interactions.
Because in the virtual world, they're powerful, the rules are clear, and failure has absolutely no real-world consequences. You just respawn.
But the consequence of never failing in the real world is that they never grow. They fail to take on responsibilities, drop out of the workforce, and avoid pursuing demanding careers or romantic relationships.
Because those require real-world risk and vulnerability. The book shares an anecdote about a boy that perfectly captures this sinking dynamic: a carpenter and his 14-year-old son, James.
Oh, this story is heartbreaking.
James has mild autism, but before the pandemic, he was doing quite well, progressing in school, doing judo, highly physical, real-world activity. But then the COVID lockdowns hit when he was 11.
11 is a critical age for male neurological development, the dawn of puberty.
Right. And his parents, desperate to find something for him to do, bought him a PlayStation. At first, it seemed great. He was talking to friends online. But as he started playing Fortnite for longer periods every day, a dark transformation occurred.
The author describes this as the heavy gamer transition.
Yes. His father noted that depression, baseline anger, and sheer apathy set in. James stopped caring about schoolwork and physical health. He started aggressively snapping at his parents.
The game's algorithms had completely hijacked his dopamine reward system.
Nothing in the real world could compete. So the parents took all the electronics away. And just like with Emily and her Instagram addiction, the reaction was clinical withdrawal.
A severe physical withdrawal. James exhibited deep irritability, physical aggressiveness, and refused to leave his room for days.
The father told the author that even after the acute withdrawal faded, they felt trapped. He said, "We try to limit his use, but he doesn't have any friends other than those he communicates with online, so how much can we actually cut him off?"
This raises perhaps the most important question for any parent listening. When the entire social ecosystem of modern childhood has migrated onto these addictive devices, how can an individual parent possibly fight back?
If resisting means intentionally socially isolating your own child from their peers, are parents just trapped in a prisoner's dilemma?
It's an incredibly difficult spot to be in.
So what does this all mean? Are we just doomed to watch this anxious generation sink further into the virtual abyss? Today, we have mapped out the devastating architecture of the problem.
We covered a massive amount of evidence.
We really did. We explored the insane thought experiment of the virtual Mars, where tech billionaires sent our kids without protective shields. We looked at the undeniable hockey stick hospital data proving a surge in suffering starting in the early 2010s.
We uncovered the historical backstory of overprotective parenting, accidentally killing the play-based childhood,
replacing it with a toxic phone-based one. We broke down the profound neurological damage of the 4 foundational harms: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
And we explored the targeted gender-specific traps, the visual comparison destroying girls on social media, and the addictive virtual mastery causing a failure to launch in boys. It is a heavy, sobering reality to confront. But understanding the exact mechanics, the biology, and the history of this trap is the first required step to breaking our children out of it. We have to see the bars of the cage before we can open the door.
And break out of it we must. In part 2, we will explore spiritual elevation and degradation and actionable steps including preparing for collective action, what governments, schools, and parents can do now, and the 4 foundational reforms to bring childhood back to Earth.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the evidence, I want to leave you with a thought drawn from the ancient wisdom referenced in the text. The Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, warned us nearly 2,000 years ago not to hand our minds over to just anyone to be confused and upset.
Why give strangers the power to control your internal state?
Exactly. Later, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius told us not to waste our precious time worrying about what other people are doing or thinking because it keeps us from focusing on the development of our own minds.
Such profound wisdom.
If the great Stoic philosophers believed that true mental freedom and resilience came from fiercely ignoring the judgments of the crowd, what happens to a human civilization that hardwires its children to care about absolutely nothing but the judgments of the crowd, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, starting at age 10? Something for you to think about. Until next time. And it is so great to be back for the second half of this.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So let me just set the stage for everyone listening. This is part 2 and the final conclusion of our deep dive into Jonathan Haidt's landmark book, The Anxious Generation.
Right. And just to recap for anyone who might be jumping in part 1, we uncovered the surge of mental illness, the loss of play-based childhood, and the 4 foundational harms. Now we move to solutions and spiritual restoration.
Exactly. And I want to give you all a really clear roadmap of exactly what we're going to cover today. We are breaking down Chapter 8, Spiritual Elevation and Degradation, Chapter 9, Preparing for Collective Action, Chapter 10, What Governments and Tech Companies Can Do Now, Chapter 11, What Schools Can Do Now, Chapter 12, What Parents Can Do Now, and finally, the conclusion, Bring Childhood Back to Earth.
It's a lot. I mean, it is a packed agenda, but honestly, an absolute vital one. We laid out some heavy, sobering facts in the first half of this discussion, but the whole mission of this deep dive today is entirely about empowerment.
Right. It's about actionable solutions.
Yes. Looking at the systemic traps we're caught in, and more importantly, the really concrete solutions we can use to reclaim healthy human development.
I am so ready for the solutions. But to start off, we need to go back to this thought experiment from the book, because it really reframes everything.
Oh, the Mars analogy.
Yes, the Mars analogy. So imagine a visionary tech billionaire approaches you tomorrow with this incredible once-in-a-lifetime offer. They are building the very first permanent human settlement on Mars. And out of millions of candidates, they have selected your 10-year-old daughter to join the colony.
Just an absolutely massive honor,
right? She was chosen based on her academic performance, a scan of her genome, her overall potential. But here's the kicker. You don't actually remember giving consent for this. Your daughter signed herself up because literally all of her friends are doing it. And now she is begging you, like crying, pleading to let her go.
Which is just the ultimate parental nightmare dressed up as an unparalleled opportunity. Because before you even think about saying yes, you start doing the research that, any responsible parent would do.
Yeah, you hit Google, you try to figure out what this actually entails.
Right. And you find out that the company wants children specifically because of a biological theory. They believe that going through puberty on Mars will permanently tailor a developing human body to that alien environment.
Okay, as a parent, my immediate reaction is absolute panic. I mean, you are talking about altering the fundamental biological development of a child.
Exactly. And the more you dig into this Mars mission, the more horrifying it becomes. Because there are two massive, glaring problems with this plan. First, there is the radiation. Earth has a magnetosphere that protects us from cosmic rays, but Mars does not.
So it's just raw cosmic radiation.
It's just completely blasting them.
Yeah.
A massive amount of solar and cosmic radiation will shoot continuously through the DNA of every cell in your daughter's body. And because a child's cells are developing and dividing so rapidly during puberty, they are at a profoundly higher risk for catastrophic, irreversible cellular damage. Way more than a fully grown adult would be.
That alone is terrifying. You are essentially putting a child in a microwave. But what is the second problem?
The second problem is the gravity. I mean, Mars only has 38% of Earth's gravity. And human evolution over millions of years optimized our skeletons, our cardiovascular systems, even our eyes, for the specific, constant 1G gravitational pull of Earth.
We're literally built for this planet.
Exactly. Taking away that constant one-way pull completely alters human physiology. We already know that adult astronauts on the International Space Station, they lose severe amounts of bone density.
Right.
They suffer from fluid pooling in their upper bodies and their brains, which puts immense dangerous pressure on their eyeballs and optic nerves. So a child raised in 38% gravity wouldn't just be inconvenienced. She would be at extremely high risk of developing severe, permanent deformities in her skeleton, her heart, and her brain structure.
So if a company proposed this, you would demand to see the safety data, right?
Right.
You would want congressional hearings. You'd want an army of pediatricians analyzing exactly how they mitigated these astronomical risks for a developing child before a single rocket ever left the launch pad.
You would absolutely think so.
Yeah.
But in this thought experiment, you discover something totally chilling. The company planning the mission has done absolutely no child safety research whatsoever.
No.
Zero. They haven't run a single long-term study on the effects of low gravity and high radiation on a preteen. And even worse, they don't actually require proof of actual parental permission to launch.
Wait, what?
Yeah. As long as your 10-year-old clicks a little checkbox on a digital screen claiming she has parental consent, she can strap in and blast off to a highly irradiated, low-gravity wasteland, potentially never to return to Earth.
I mean, that's insane. If a toy company released a physical product that warped a child's spine, they'd be sued into oblivion overnight. Their executives would be in handcuffs. So why on earth are we starting today's deep dive by talking about a fictional trip to Mars?
Because it isn't fiction. I mean, it is a metaphor, but this is the exact direct parallel that Jonathan Haidt draws in the book.
Yeah.
We didn't send our children to a physical Mars. But in the early 2000s, technology companies created world-changing digital products.
The first smartphones, the early social networks.
Yeah. And at first, there was this immense techno-optimism. These tools were designed for adults to connect, to communicate, to work. But by the early 2010s, those same companies completely rewired childhood.
They pivoted to the kids.
They released highly addictive, algorithm-driven social media platforms, and handed them to preteens and teenagers without doing any safety research on minors. None.
And just like the Mars company, all a kid had to do was click a box saying they were old enough, and they were in.
Precisely. And they were exposed to a totally alien environment that their brains were not evolved for.
Okay, I love this analogy, but I want to push back on it for a second, because I can hear the skeptics listening right now saying, hold on, aren't we just repeating the moral panic of the 1980s and 90s?
The television argument.
Right. Back then, people swore that video games, Dungeons & Dragons, MTV, they were going to rot kids' brains and destroy society, and they didn't. Society survived. So why is this digital Mars any different from the television sets we grew up in front of?
That is the most common counterargument. And it is so crucial to understand why this time is fundamentally different. It really comes down to the mechanism of the technology.
Yeah, so.
Well, MTV and early video games were largely static, one-way broadcasts. You watched a music video, it ended, and you went outside. What happened between 2010 and 2015, the period Haidt defines as the Great Rewiring, was the introduction of bidirectional algorithmic machine learning.
Explain the mechanism there. What does bidirectional actually mean in this context?
It means the machine is watching you back. When you handed a 12-year-old an iPhone in 2012, you weren't handing them a screen to watch. You were handing them a slot machine designed by some of the brightest behavioral psychologists on the planet.
So it's actively trying to hook them.
Yes. Social media platforms employ what B.F. Skinner called variable ratio reward schedules.
Okay, the Skinner box. I remember this from Psych 101. This is where you put a rat in a box, and if it presses a lever, it sometimes gets food and sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly. If the rat gets food every single time it presses the lever, it actually gets bored. It only eats when it's hungry. But if the rat gets food randomly, maybe on the third press, maybe on the 10th, maybe on the 50th, its dopamine system goes into absolute overdrive.
It's unpredictable.
Right. It will pull that lever until it collapses from exhaustion. The invention of the like button, the infinite scroll, and the algorithmic feed turned a teenager's social life into a variable ratio reward schedule. Every time they open the app, they pull the lever.
Wow.
Will I have a like? Will someone have commented? Am I trending? Am I being mocked?
So unlike MTV, which just played music, these algorithms actively learned what kept each individual user's dopamine spiking and tailored a bespoke, highly addictive reality just for them.
Yes. And we dropped an entire generation into this untested, algorithmic environment during the most vulnerable developmental window of their lives, which is puberty. We effectively subjected them to the digital equivalent of low gravity and high radiation, completely altering their developmental trajectory.
Which explains the profound sense of exhaustion and powerlessness that so many parents feel today. I mean, you aren't just trying to enforce a simple bedtime or tell your kid to turn off the TV. You are fighting massive, unchecked, trillion-dollar industries that have bypassed you entirely to get direct access to your child's developing brain.
Exactly. And this brings us right into Chapter 9 and the concept of the collective action problem. Because individual parents feel completely trapped. They know the smartphone is causing harm. They see the constant conflict in their homes, the sleep deprivation, the anxiety.
But they feel like they can't do anything about it.
Right, because if a parent unilaterally decides to remove their child's smartphone, they are functionally condemning that child to social isolation.
Why? Because the entirety of their peer group is communicating, socializing, making plans, and existing online. If you take the phone away, your child basically ceases to exist in the social ecosystem of middle school. It's the classic prisoner's dilemma from game theory.
Exactly. In a collective action problem, a group of people would all benefit from a certain action, in this case taking smartphones away from 11-year-olds. But the associated cost of acting alone is too high for any individual to bear.
Right. If you're the only parent who does it, your kid is the outcast.
Exactly. So no one acts and everyone suffers.
Man. To really grasp why this collective action problem is a true hair-on-fire emergency, we need to look at the staggering data from the early 2010s. Because the consequences of this great rewiring are not theoretical. They aren't just kids being a little more distracted.
No, they are deeply empirical and they are terrifying. When we look at the data, we see a synchronized international increase in rates of adolescent mental illness that hits a sharp, violent hockey stick curve upward exactly in the early 2010s.
Just right when the algorithms dropped.
Right, when everyone got a smartphone. The psychiatric data is shocking. Since 2010, the rate of major depressive episodes for teens, specifically ages 12 to 17, has increased by 145% for girls.
Oh my God.
And for boys, it increased by 161%.
I really want to let that sink in for a moment for everyone listening. 145% and 161% increase. Depression became roughly 2.5 times more prevalent across all races, all geographic regions, and all social classes in just a few short years. And I want to be very clear here. This isn't just teens filling out a survey and saying, I feel sad today.
No, this is where the hard behavioral data becomes vital. Because some skeptics initially argue that maybe Gen Z is just more comfortable talking about mental health.
Right, the awareness argument.
Yeah, maybe the stigma decreased, leading to higher self-reported numbers. And while the stigma definitely did decrease, that does not explain the physical hospital data.
The emergency room statistics.
Yes. When we look at hospital admissions, the reality is undeniable. Hospital emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm, so things like cutting or intentional poisoning among young girls between the ages of 10 and 14, nearly tripled since 2010.
Tripled for 10 to 14-year-olds.
That is a 188% increase in emergency psychiatric interventions for preteen and young teen girls. You cannot attribute a 188% spike in emergency room visits for self-harm to less stigma.
No. That is an absolute epidemic of pain. And the book shares some incredibly heavy anecdotes that put a human face on these statistics. There's this story of a Boston mother and her 14-year-old daughter, Emily.
Yeah, that one is brutal.
It really is.
Yeah.
The parents realized that Instagram was completely destroying Emily's well-being. She was agitated, glum, constantly comparing her body to influencers, just completely losing the light in her eyes. So the parents did what all the tech blogs tell you to do. They tried to use monitoring software on her phone to curb her access and set digital boundaries.
Which is the standard advice, right? Just monitor their usage, be involved, talk to them about screen time.
Right. But it didn't work. Emily bypassed the software entirely. She figured out how to hack into her mother's phone, disabled the monitoring app from the admin side, and then, when confronted, she explicitly threatened suicide if her parents dared to reinstall it. The mother noted this heartbreaking detail too. When Emily went to a strict, phone-free summer camp for 6 weeks, she completely reverted to her normal, happy, bubbly self. Her brain reset. But the literal minute the phone was back in her hand on the car ride home, the agitation and darkness returned instantly.
What you are describing is a devastating cycle of chemical addiction and withdrawal. Her dopamine receptors were so hijacked by the variable rewards of the algorithm that removing the device triggered a genuine neurological crisis.
That's just like a drug.
It is. And it's not limited to social media, and it is not limited to girls. Haidt also shares the story of a carpenter and his 14-year-old son, James, who has mild autism.
Tell me about James. What happened there?
Well, James was doing well. He was participating in martial arts, keeping up in school, having dinner with his family. But during the COVID lockdowns, when he couldn't go to martial arts, his parents bought him a PlayStation to keep him occupied. He started playing Fortnite. And then he started playing for longer and longer periods.
And Fortnite, I mean, it's essentially a massive social chat room disguised as a battle royale game.
Exactly. And the behavioral shift in James was drastic. His father described how depression, intense anger, and a sudden violent aggressiveness emerged. He started snapping viciously at his family.
Just totally out of character.
Totally out of character. When the parents finally realized the game was destroying him and tried to take the electronics away, James experienced severe, terrifying withdrawal symptoms. He became highly aggressive, refused to leave his room, and completely isolated himself. But the parents felt totally trapped by the collective action problem, asking themselves, he doesn't have any friends other than those he communicates with online in this game, so how much can we really cut him off without ruining his social life?
Man. Which raises an incredibly important question about the specific mechanics of the harm we are seeing here. The terminology the book uses is really clarifying. Why do the girls seem to hurt themselves while the boys seem to lash out or withdraw into gaming?
If we look at the broader picture of psychiatric diagnosis, we are looking at an epidemic of what psychologists call internalizing disorders.
Okay, internalizing.
These are conditions where a person feels strong distress and turns those symptoms inward. It manifests as anxiety, fear, sadness, hopelessness, and obsessive rumination. This is fundamentally different from externalizing disorders, where distress is turned outward toward the environment and other people.
So that would be things like conduct disorders, anger management issues, impulsivity, or violence?
Exactly. And historically, externalizing disorders usually affect boys more, while internalizing affects girls more.
Right, that aligns with the James and Emily stories.
But what we are seeing now is a massive spike in internalizing disorders across the board. Both sexes are experiencing a tidal wave of internalizing disorders, though it hits girls the hardest. And the absolute core of this wave is anxiety.
I really want to spend some time on this because we throw the word anxiety around a lot, like, oh, I'm anxious about my test, or I'm anxious about traffic. But the book is very careful to define the clinical difference between fear and anxiety.
It is a vital distinction. Fear is an evolutionary alarm bell. It is a lightning-fast biological response to a perceived imminent physical threat.
Like seeing Predator.
Exactly. If you are walking in the woods and see a bear, your amygdala instantly triggers a release of adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, blood rushes to your muscles so you can fight or run away. It's a brilliant survival mechanism. But crucially, once you escape the bear and the threat passes, the alarm turns off. Your nervous system returns to baseline.
But anxiety is different. Anxiety doesn't turn off.
Right. Anxiety is the anticipation of a future threat. It is when that evolutionary alarm bell is set on a hair trigger and activated by ordinary non-threatening events or by obsessive thoughts about what might happen tomorrow.
It's constantly humming in the background.
Yes. When you are suffering from an anxiety disorder, you are kept in a perpetual, exhausting state of physical and mental distress. Your cortisol levels never drop. And here is the key to understand in social media. Humans didn't just evolve to fear physical predators.
Right, because for a hunter-gatherer, being exiled from the tribe meant certain death. You couldn't survive the winter alone.
Precisely. Our survival depended entirely on our social groups. Therefore, the human brain is hyper-attuned to social threats. Shame, ostracization, being judged poorly by the tribe, these trigger the exact same biological panic response in the brain as seeing a physical predator.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting to me. Why are we so vulnerable to this specifically now? Is it just the raw amount of screen time, or is it how these devices literally hijack that specific evolutionary biology? Because think about what we did. We handed preteens, whose brains are actively rewiring to care desperately about peer approval, a device that exposes them to the constant, quantifiable judgment of thousands of peers and strangers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It's an anxiety machine.
Yes. It's built to trigger our deepest evolutionary fear of social death.
You've hit the nail on the head. We created an environment where the social threat never goes away. You take the bully home in your pocket, you take the judgment into your bed. And that is the perfect transition into Chapter 8, exploring spiritual elevation and degradation. Haidt argues that a phone-based life doesn't just make us anxious, it degrades us on a fundamental, psychological, and even spiritual level.
Let's unpack this concept of spiritual degradation, because we hear the phrase real world versus virtual world all the time. It sounds like a cliche, but the book defines the real world with 4 very specific mechanical features that have guided human evolution and nervous system regulation for millions of years. Let's go through them.
Okay, so first, the real world is embodied. We use our physical bodies to communicate. When we are face-to-face, our nervous systems are interacting. We read micro-expressions, posture, the dilation of pupils, the tone of voice.
We're constantly taking in data.
Exactly. There is a whole field of study called polyvagal theory that explained how mammals regulate each other's nervous systems through physical presence and eye contact. We respond to each other consciously and unconsciously.
And contrast that with the virtual world, which is entirely disembodied. It requires no physical presence, no eye contact, no shared breathing. It is just language and curated imagery on a glass screen, which, by the way, can now easily be faked by generative AI. You lose 90% of the biological data your brain needs to feel safe and connected.
Second feature, the real world is synchronous. Interactions happen in real time. There is a natural flowing rhythm of turn-taking, pauses, interruptions, and immediate feedback. Your brain is fully engaged in the present moment.
I can give a personal example of this. Have you ever sent a text message that was meant to be a joke, but because it lacked that synchronous embodied delivery, the smile, the laugh, the other person took it entirely seriously and got offended?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
The virtual world is highly asynchronous. It consists of text posts, delayed comments, curated videos. You aren't interacting in the moment. You are performing for a delayed reaction. You post a photo and then wait hours, checking back obsessively to see if the tribe approved of it.
Which is just exhausting for the brain.
Third feature. The real world primarily involves one-to-one or one-to-a-few communication. You are talking to the person in front of you, or maybe a small group at a dinner table. The cognitive load is manageable.
But the virtual world is built on one-to-many broadcasting. You are communicating to a vast, invisible, silent audience. You aren't having a conversation. You are managing a personal brand. Asking a 12-year-old girl to manage a public relations brand for thousands of followers is a recipe for cognitive collapse.
And the force feature, which I think is the most critical of all, the real world operates in communities with a high bar for entry and exit. Think about a physical neighborhood, a classroom, or a sports team. If you have a fight with a friend at school or a disagreement with your neighbor, you still have to see them the next day.
You can't just run away. No. You are strongly motivated by the environment to invest in those relationships, to apologize, to compromise, to repair the rift, because leaving the community is physically and socially difficult.
The friction is high.
Yes, exactly. The virtual world, conversely, has an incredibly low bar for entry and exit. Relationships online are largely disposable. If someone disagrees with you or you just get bored of them, you don't do the hard psychological work of repairing the relationship.
We just click block.
You mute them, you ghost them, you exit the community instantly with zero friction.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, think about the developmental consequences of this. When you raise a child in a constantly mutating network of disposable relationships where they can just vanish with a click, they never learn the vital human skills of conflict resolution, empathy, and emotional regulation. It is like we've traded deep, oxygen-rich relationships for cheap, digital junk food. We are spiritually starving while consuming thousands of empty calories a day. We are fragmenting our minds and replacing sacred, grounded human experiences with endless, shallow, algorithmic scrolling.
And what's really fascinating is that while the technology is new, the psychological vulnerability is not. This is not a new philosophical problem. Haidt brings in ancient wisdom to combat modern tech, showing that the struggle for mental sovereignty is basically timeless. He looks to the Stoics.
The Stoics were obsessed with the locus of control, separating what you can control from what you can't.
Exactly. Haidt quotes Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher from the 1st century CE, who said something that sounds like it was written yesterday about Twitter.
What did he say?
Epictetus said, "If your body was turned over to just anyone, you would doubtless take exception. Why aren't you ashamed that you have made your mind vulnerable to anyone who happens to criticize you or despise you?"
Wow. That is exactly what checking your mentions on social media is. You are literally handing the keys to your dopamine system and your emotional state over to a stranger with an anime profile picture who decides to leave a mean comment.
Precisely. And Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor in the 2nd century, warned against wasting time worrying about what others are doing and thinking. He wrote that constantly obsessing over what so-and-so is saying or up to keeps you from focusing on your own mind. It prevents you from doing anything useful. 2,000 years ago, the greatest minds in the world recognized the profound spiritual degradation of constant social comparison and distraction.
The technology we have today just weaponized vulnerability the human brain has always had, but on an industrial scale. However, relying on individual willpower, like quoting Roman philosophy to a 13-year-old girl who is crying because she wasn't invited to a party she saw on Snapchat, isn't going to fix this. We are fighting a systemic collective action problem. So to stop this degradation, we can't just tell kids to put the phone down. We need society-wide structural changes.
We do. And Chapter 10 lays this out across 3 major pillars of action.
Let's move into the first of those solutions, Pillar 1, what governments and tech companies must do. Because right now, the tech companies are largely operating with total impunity.
This is where we have to drastically reevaluate. Haidt points out that the social media companies of today are behaving exactly like the tobacco companies of the mid-20th century.
Oh, that's a powerful comparison.
It's so accurate. Tobacco executives designed products to be highly chemically addictive, knew they caused cancer, and then intentionally skirted laws to market them to minors using cartoon characters like Joe Camel.
I'd also compare it to the oil companies that fought for decades against banning leaded gasoline. Think about that history. The scientific evidence was mounting that putting millions of tons of lead into the atmosphere was causing severe, measurable cognitive damage and lowering the IQs of children worldwide. The companies knew it, but they fought regulation tooth and nail because lead made the engines run smoother. They kept selling a neurotoxin to protect their profit margins.
It is a perfect parallel. The algorithms make the platforms run smoother, they maximize engagement, but they are a neurotoxin for adolescent development. Now, currently, the main legal protection in the United States standing between children and these massive tech algorithms is a piece of legislation called COPI, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of COPI because it is a joke. It was enacted in 1998. Think about what the internet was in 1998. It was dial-up. It was the sound of a modem screeching. It was static GeoCities web pages and AOL chat rooms. The iPhone didn't exist. The algorithmic feed didn't exist. Yet this ancient law from the dial-up era is still our primary defense.
And what COPI essentially did was set the age of internet adulthood at 13. But it is crucial to understand that 13 wasn't chosen based on some profound developmental psychology data or child safety research.
So why 13?
It was largely a compromise related to data collection. The government wanted to restrict how much data companies could scrape from young children. But more importantly, COPI does not require any real structural age verification.
Right. If you are a 10-year-old trying to sign up for TikTok, the app asks, "When were you born?" And the 10-year-old just scrolls the wheel down to 1995. It's the easiest bouncer in the world to sneak past.
The result is that the law is entirely toothless. The data shows that 40% of children under the age of 13 have Instagram accounts. 40%. The tech companies know this. Their internal documents show they know this. They benefit from it because they need lifelong users. So what governments must do right now is mandate strict, enforceable age verification at the platform level.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here, because I know a lot of listeners are incredibly privacy conscious. They're thinking, I do not want to give Mark Zuckerberg my driver's license or my passport just to use Instagram. How do we verify age without creating a massive centralized database of government IDs that hackers can steal?
It is a totally valid concern, but it's actually solvable through modern cryptography. We have the technology to verify age without violating privacy using things like zero-knowledge proofs or digital IDs handled by independent third parties.
Explain how a zero-knowledge proof works for the listener.
Imagine you want to prove to a bouncer that you are over 21 to get into a bar, but you don't want the bouncer to know your name, your address, or even your exact birthday. A zero-knowledge proof is a cryptographic method where a trusted digital ID on your phone basically does a mathematical handshake with the platform.
Okay.
The platform asks, is this user over 18? And your phone mathematically proves, yes, they are over 18, without transmitting a single piece of identifying data. The platform gets the verification, but they get zero knowledge of who you actually are. We can mandate this.
That completely solves the privacy argument. So first, we mandate age verification. Second, the government must update COPO to raise the age of internet adulthood from 13 to at least 16. We have to protect the window of early puberty.
And third, governments have to hold tech platforms legally liable for the harms their algorithms specifically inflict on minors. Right now, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act gives tech companies massive immunity. It treats them like a neutral public square, like a telephone company. If two people plan a crime over the phone, you don't sue AT&T.
But a social media feed is not a telephone wire. It is not neutral.
Exactly. If an algorithm is deliberately designed by engineers to detect that a 12-year-old girl is feeling insecure about her body, and it intentionally feeds her a relentless stream of pro-anorexia content just to keep her scrolling for 5 more minutes to show her one more ad, the platform is no longer a neutral host. They are actively curating and pushing the harm. They must be liable for the resulting damage.
I know some people balk at regulation. They say it slows down innovation. But we regulate alcohol. We regulate casinos. We mandate seatbelts in cars. Why do we let preteens, whose frontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and delaying gratification, are literally still under construction wander, completely unchaperoned into the most highly engineered, addictive virtual casinos ever built?
It's a complete failure of public policy. And because the government has failed to regulate the platforms, the burden has been forced entirely onto the shoulders of schools and parents. Which brings us to Chapter 11, the second major pillar of solutions, what schools can do now.
Schools have really become ground zero for this crisis. Teachers are dealing with exhausted, anxious students who cannot focus for more than 3 minutes. What is the structural solution here?
The absolute baseline requirement, according to the research, is that schools must implement strictly phone-free environments. And that means a bell-to-bell ban. From the moment the student walks in the door to the moment the final bell rings, they do not have a phone.
But hold on, a lot of schools already have policies. They say, keep it in your backpack, or no phones during instruction time. Isn't that enough? Why do we need to go further?
The cognitive data strongly suggests that keep it in your backpack is a complete failure. If the phone is merely in a pocket or a backpack, the student's attention remains deeply fragmented. There is robust psychological research, such as the famous Ward et al. Study from the University of Texas, showing that the mere physical presence of a smartphone, even if it is turned off and face down on a desk, actively drains cognitive capacity.
Wait, explain the mechanism of brain drain. How can an object that is turned off affect your brain?
It has to do with working memory and inhibition. If your phone is in your pocket, part of your brain knows it is there. Part of your brain knows that there is a universe of dopamine, social connection, and potential threats sitting right next to your leg. Your prefrontal cortex has to actively dedicate cognitive resources to override the impulse to check it. You are literally burning mental energy just trying to ignore the phone. It reduces your fluid intelligence and your working memory capacity.
So it's constantly pulling on their attention like a magnet, even when they're trying to listen to a math lecture.
Exactly. Furthermore, if they can access the phone in the hallways between classes or in the cafeteria during lunch, the social dynamic of the school remains completely broken. They aren't talking to each other. They aren't practicing synchronous, embodied communication. They are staring at screens, curating their online presence, or worse, dealing with cyberbullying while eating their lunch.
So what is the actual logistical solution for a school? Because you can't just pat kids down at the door.
The standard must be physical separation, storing phones, smartwatches, and any device that can receive a text message in locked pouches. Things like yonder pouches, where the phone is locked in a fabric bag that the student keeps with them but cannot physically open, or dedicated phone lockers for the entire duration of the school day.
So they literally cannot physically touch the screen from 8:00 a.m. to 3:00.
Yes, that is the only way to completely free up students' attention. It removes the cognitive load of having to inhibit the urge to check it. And socially, it forces them to re-engage in the real world. It forces them to make eye contact, to navigate awkward real-world conversations, to tell jokes, to actually be present with their teachers and their peers.
Okay, I agree with the logic. It makes perfect sense. But let's talk about the reality on the ground. Because if a principal tries to implement locked pouches tomorrow, the loudest, most vicious pushback isn't going to come from the students. It is going to come from the parents.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
Parents will storm the school board meeting and demand to be in 24/7 contact with their kids. They will say, what if there's an active shooter? What if there's a medical emergency? What if I just need to tell them their dentist appointment changed? How do schools overcome that intense parental panic?
This is a crucial friction point, and it ties into the core thesis of Haidt's entire book. Haidt explains that this parental panic is actually a symptom of the very overprotection that fueled the anxiety crisis in the first place. Parents need to look at the statistical reality. In the physical world, the actual risk of a child being kidnapped by a stranger or violently injured at school has plummeted since the 1990s. Schools are statistically incredibly safe places.
Right.
Yet, parents have been conditioned by the 24-hour news cycle and social media to perceive the physical world as infinitely more dangerous than it actually is.
So we traded physical autonomy for digital surveillance. We put a GPS tracker in their pocket, but that tracker is also a portal to the most psychologically damaging environment on Earth.
Precisely. Parents demand a digital umbilical cord to soothe their own anxiety. They want the illusion of control. But in doing so, they are actively facilitating their child's access to the virtual world that is demonstrably causing them psychological harm every single day.
And regarding emergencies, let's be blunt. If there is a true catastrophic emergency at a school, a student texting their mother does not help the situation. In fact, security experts consistently say that hundreds of phones going off and students being distracted by texting instead of listening to teachers' instructions makes emergency situations vastly more dangerous.
Exactly. Schools have to hold the line. Administrators need to communicate clearly and firmly to parents that in a true emergency, the main office is still the point of contact, just as it was for decades before 2012. The minor convenience of texting a child about a schedule change is not worth the catastrophic daily cost to their attention, their social development, and their mental health.
Which perfectly sets up Chapter 12 and our final pillar of solutions, what parents can do now. Because ultimately, parents are the ones on the front lines of this collective action problem.
To understand what parents must do, we have to recognize the tragic historical irony that Haidt breaks down so brilliantly. In the 1980s and 1990s, a cultural shift occurred. Parents became absolutely terrified of real-world risks. The media was saturated with stories of stranger danger, high-profile kidnappings, and playground injuries.
I remember that era.
Yeah. And as a result of this fear, parents virtually eliminated unsupervised outdoor play.
Right. Children used to roam their neighborhoods until the streetlights came on. Suddenly, every moment was adult-supervised, highly structured, and scheduled. Playdates had to be organized weeks in advance.
And right as we locked them indoors to keep them physically safe from statistically rare threats, the smartphone arrived in their bedrooms.
The smartphone became the ultimate experience blocker.
Yes. Parents heavily overprotected their kids in the physical world, depriving them of the friction, the physical risk, and the independence necessary for healthy development. And simultaneously, they completely underprotected them in the virtual world. They dropped them into the most dangerous psychological environment ever created without a map, without a shield, and without any supervision.
So how do we reverse this? How do we break the trap? The book lays out 4 foundational rules. These are the absolute baseline standards that parents need to coordinate on. Rule number 1, no smartphones before high school. So roughly age 14.
This is critical. Before 9th grade, parents should only provide basic flip phones or smartwatches that only have calling capabilities. Devices that can call and text, but do not have an internet browser and do not have access to the App Store. You must delay their entry into around-the-clock internet-connected life until they have a firmer footing in reality and a more developed prefrontal cortex.
But let me argue with this. If you give a 12-year-old a flip phone today, they are going to be bullied. They won't be in the iMessage group chat where the soccer team coordinates practice. The friction is incredibly high.
The friction is high if you do it alone. That is the collective action problem. But if you talk to 3 other parents on that soccer team and you all agree to get flip phones, suddenly there's a critical mass. You change the norm.
Which leads to rule number 2, no social media before age 16.
The early years of puberty, ages 11 to 15, are the most vulnerable period of brain development in a human's life. The brain is aggressively pruning neural connections and myelinating others. Adolescents become hypersensitive to social reward and peer judgment.
And social media preys right on that.
Yes. You have to let that window pass before you introduce an algorithmic fire hose of social comparison, curated influencers, and impossible beauty standards. Let them figure out who they actually are in the real world before you force them to manage a brand in the virtual world.
Rule number 3, we already covered in depth, but it applies to parents too. Phone-free schools. Parents need to be the ones demanding it. Support your principals and school boards when they push for lock pouches. Don't be the parent fighting for the digital umbilical cord.
And finally, rule number 4, which is perhaps the most important for actually healing the damage. Far more unsupervised play and childhood independence.
Explain the psychology of unsupervised play. Why is it so crucial?
It acts as an inoculation. There is a concept by Nassim Taleb called anti-fragility. Things that are fragile break when put under stress. But things that are anti-fragile actually require stress to grow stronger. The human skeletal system is anti-fragile. If you don't put weight on your bones, they wither. The human nervous system is also anti-fragile.
So when young mammals play freely without an adult hovering over them, they encounter small, manageable risks and stressors.
Exactly. They climb a low tree and fall out and scrape their knee. They get into a heated argument over the rules of a pickup basketball game. They get lost for 5 minutes wandering in a new neighborhood. These small, real-world challenges and setbacks inoculate them against severe anxiety.
It's like practice for life.
It teaches their nervous system that they are capable of handling stress, experiencing negative emotions, and recovering on their own. It builds resilience. It prepares them for the much larger, unavoidable challenges of adulthood.
But when adults supervise everything, they intervene before the child can solve the problem.
Yes. Without that unsupervised play, their evolutionary alarm bells become hypersensitive. Every minor inconvenience feels like a catastrophic threat because they have no lived experience of overcoming adversity on their own.
So what does this all mean when we put these 4 rules together? As we said, if just one parent tries to implement these 4 rules, it is agonizing. The child feels isolated. But, and here's where the hope truly lies, if a whole community, a whole PTA, a whole neighborhood or church group adopts these 4 simple, zero-cost rules simultaneously, the collective action problem evaporates instantly.
That is the beauty of the solution. It requires no new technology. It requires no government funding. If a group of parents coordinates, no child is socially isolated because all the children are offline. If none of the 12-year-olds in a neighborhood have smartphones, what happens? They get bored.
And boredom is good.
And when they get bored, they have to go knock on each other's doors. They have to go to the park. They're forced back into embodied, synchronous, real-world play. The trap is sprung and childhood is restored.
Which brings us to the conclusion of the book, powerfully titled, Bring Childhood Back to Earth.
Hate's final message is a profound call to arms. We have inadvertently subjected our children to a radical, untested developmental experiment. We launched them onto the low-gravity, high-radiation virtual Mars of the algorithm. And we are seeing the catastrophic results in the data, in the emergency rooms, and in the silence of our own homes.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's not too late. The damage is not entirely permanent if we act. We have the power to pull them back. We must coordinate, overcome our own fears and conveniences, and bring human life back to Earth.
And that leaves us with a final, I think, haunting question to consider, because we've spent this time analyzing the immense damage that smartphones and basic 2D social media algorithms did in just the span of a few years. But technology isn't stopping. It is accelerating.
Exponentially.
Right. With generative AI now capable of creating hyper-realistic fake realities and perfectly simulating human companionship, and spatial computing like the Apple Vision Pro promising a fully immersive 3D virtual universe, the screens aren't just going to be in our pockets anymore. They are literally strapping onto our faces. The virtual Mars is about to become infinitely more convincing, immersive, and addictive. If we don't draw a line in the sand, understand the mechanisms of these tools, and reclaim our minds and our children's childhoods today, will the next generation even know what the real world looks like?
It's definitely something we all need to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, deeply necessary two-part journey. We hope it gave you the tools, the data, and the context you need to navigate this rewiring of human life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Fact Horizon to keep exploring the profound truths of human existence with us. Until next time, keep looking beyond the horizon.